Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
This is Greg Hutchins. Good morning, Fred. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. We were talking about squirrels and, suburban pest is the one way to phrase it. I chased a whole murder of crows out of my garden this morning, so I was like, but we were talking offline, and it was a question I was getting a couple times this week. One was related to like a risk management tool like FMEA. Is when do you say this is enough of a safety problem that it elevates to that we really need to deal with it, versus when you're just working with engineers or designs with prototypes and something fails kind of in an unsafe way-ish. Is that worth elevating and, putting on the system? And another one was more working with the insurance side of, it was more in the insurance business and for buildings and facilities and plants and stuff like that. And he's a consultant working to prevent safety issues and fires and stuff like that in particular. And what he noticed was that some organizations go, all right, if there's a rational path to that's not safe, we will fix it, because and just inherently they say, well, if it's not safe, we need to deal with it. We just take care of it. And we're not, thanks for bringing it to our attention. We should have caught that. It was kind of a difference in culture. Some say, no, we just got to deal with that. And then others go, well, make it go away. Don't tell me about that. Can you fix the inspection? What standard are you using? And it's kind of, and I've run into some organizations and cases where they shipped it because they were making money and they made enough profit they could pay lawyers to drag it out long enough that they were safe, until they weren't. And then they got shut down. But it's part of risk management. It's part of what we do in reliability engineering. But every now and then, whether in design or in the field, some product fails and it catches on fire, for example, or as one lawyer told me to say, a visual thermal event. Like, okay, you burned the house down. Yeah, well, it was visually done. Yeah, right. Okay. But the discussions I had this week with around those questions was, what's the trigger? When should you elevate it to do something about it? And I found myself struggling with that quite a bit.
Okay, so what type of response do you want, Fred?
Well, one that I could use, if it's like, there's no way to judge, then I'm back to where I was, right? But if there's, when should I be a whistleblower versus when, which is a whole different problem or question, but when should I speak up and when should I not? And and I used it once in an expert witness case, is I said, here's the code of ethics that's, mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and PEs and CREs and all these different bodies that are social, professional networks or licensing bodies or certification bodies say, you really need to follow this code of ethics. And they're all very, very similar. There might be slightly different wording, but they're cover many of the same things. And one of them is that you don't design something that's hazardous or unsafe intentionally, or in so many words. Or if you learn of something that's unsafe, you fix it. It's kind of for the good of society, for good of whatever. And so I tend to have that ethical look at it going, but I know it's not black and white.
Yeah, it's not in black and white. So almost 100% of the engagements we do, one of the first things we deal with are lawyers.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, it's important, and it's not that we bring them to the table; it's they come to the table and they ask us. And in almost every one of these discussions, it's being able to frame the issue or scope the issue. Now, what do I mean by that? It's what's interesting how you came to the conversation. You came to the conversation very globally, and you brought up a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
From a legal point of view or from a risk point of view, you frame the issue in terms of a use case. How was it used? Who used it? Was it within the specifications or requirements that were in the document? And then basically, once you have framed the issue or scoped the issue, then you can look at it in terms of boundary conditions. Was it used in the expected ways? Was it used in unexpected ways?
Mm-hmm.
Now, for us right now, this is a big issue because we deal with AI. And in our product, we've identified 11 use cases. For 11 use cases, according to the European AI Act, I have to come up with AI literacy training. So for us, the training is going to be lowest common denominator. But the Europeans are going to say, no, 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 no. You're going to be liable for unexpected uses, non-use cases, different types
Yeah.
of conditions, no human oversight, meaning human in the loop.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you have to do for us, what we do in our EULA, EULA is an end user licensing agreement. We basically specify here are the boundary conditions that this product was meant for. Anything out of that use, meaning use case, it's up to you. It's on
The
you.
user takes on it, the liability for it.
That's right.
Yeah. And I found that that's a vague shield. It doesn't always work. It depends on how much money
Well,
you got for your lawyers.
the it well, and that's the other issue. It's when you're dealing well, and by the way, there's a there's a lot of cases here, So if you're internal in an organization, meaning an employee,
Hmm.
you're basically going to be covered by the company. So your options are kappas or basically some type of escalation. And then basically,
Yeah.
if you escalate it, you're going to defer to somebody else to make the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
External,
and and there's examples and use cases on both ends of that where somebody says, "Oh, yeah, that might be a problem, but it's not in my career interest to report it or raise the issue." And I'm thinking of the ignition keys falling out,
yeah.
kind of thing. Somebody knew about it. Guy knew about it, and he's like, whatever. I'm being a little bit facetious. I don't remember all the details of that case. It might have been wherever it got reported to. So yeah, don't bother me with that. But I've run into organizations where the culture is you don't talk about problems. You just like it's not my job to fix every single problem. Wait till it becomes an urgent or somebody else will deal with it. Kick it down the road. But the other use case is the opposite end of it, where it's you become a whistleblower and you go to the senior folks and you go public and say, no, this is really a problem. then and it has its own ramifications.
And that's the internal politicking.
Yeah.
External politicking, if you're a consultant, professional engineer, or you're providing, professional advice or doing a design,
Hmm.
and you've got a ticket, meaning you're a professional engineer, and you're
Yeah.
putting your stamp on something, the liability all of a sudden is internally, you err on politics. Externally, if you're an engineer, professional engineer like I am, you err on the side of self
Self-preservation,
inflicted
but it's
or
your own
basically
ethics that come
reporting.
to play. Yeah, your own ethics come into play, and I can support this decision because it is the right balance, and here's the thought process.
Well, ethics is great when you're a professional engineer, but more importantly, it's self-preservation.
Yeah, you want to do a good job, and it's the system is designed so that you might be more cautious or more conservative, but you're monitoring the risk that's being taken yourself.
And yeah, and that's the self-preservation, because you
Yeah,
don't want to be litigated on.
yeah.
I mean, right now, as a matter of fact, I've got a client, who wants 3x professional liability.
Oh
And he
man.
said 10x. So we've got
Yeah,
them
no,
done.
my couple of my clients are doubling or triple, they've doubled it twice in the last 5 years. And I'm like, the nature of the liability insurance they want me to get is if I'm on their site and cause an accident or something like that. Because I'm not a PE. So my advice is just advice, and they own the liability of enacting whatever I tell them about. And I don't travel for work anymore. And so I'm never going to get on their site yet. a condition of doing the contract is I need, $4 million of insurance. And my
Mhm.
insurance agent's like, I mean, do you actually ever, you're not a PE, so I can't sell you the professional insurance, which is way more expensive, but are you going on their site? And I said, no. He says, you don't really need this. And I'm like, I know. Okay. But it's a condition of business and it's getting expensive to where I'm turning down projects because I'm not going to get enough revenue out of it to justify the insurance requirements. And I think that's sad.
Well, part of this thing that we have is, and that's one reason we talk to lawyers, is not
Mhm.
only do we try to scope or frame the engagement and the liability, but the other thing we try to do is get some type of indemnification, which of course they never want to do. It's
Mhm.
always a big deal. So back to your question, what's the trigger? If you're an internal I mean, if you're an employee of a company,
Mhm.
usually the trigger is safety. And at what point, at that, if it's a safety issue, you say, okay, what's the morbidity? What's the mortality? What is the consequences, essentially?
Yeah, and also frequency. I mean, if there's a 1 in a million chance that this capacitor is going to get too hot, cause a fire, or but that's where it starts to get the slippery slope for engineer types. Is it 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1 million or 1 in 10 million?
So that becomes the risk factor. And the risk
Yeah.
factor for us is really two dimensions. Well, it's actually three dimensions. It's first, it's what's the likelihood, what's the consequence, and what is the velocity or acceleration of this event happening if it occurs.
What do you mean by the velocity? Is like from when you can detect it to, is it like detection? If I can notice the brakes are going bad, I can get them repaired before they fail. Is that what you mean by velocity?
It could be that, it could be decision making, it could be the event occurring. And at
Hmm.
what point does it go from a category 1 hurricane to a five?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I get it. Yeah. I mean, it's one case I ran into is that the organization really paid to any safety issue, just about
Uh-huh.
anything, even if it had a remote chance of occurring, because they were going to make 1 million units and put them on the shelf before the first one was purchased. And they really didn't want, certain types of failures, if it completely kills the unit and is non-functional, was kind of the threshold of when you did with it in anything safety related. That if it would fail hot or fail dangerously, or behave in a way that would become dangerous. I mean, even vibration in its use, it would vibrate. But if it vibrated too much, this 20-pound piece of equipment would fall off the table. And they thought that's a safety issue. Let's dampen that vibration so it won't move and increase the grippiness of its feet and a bunch of other things. But they were very aggressive at it, and it was motivated by, if we're making one a week and we find a problem and somebody, it wasn't flippant like I'm trying to describe it, but it's like if somebody gets hurt or it's a near miss and we hear about it, we have time to fix it before we ship another one. But with 1 million on the shelves and there's a defect that'll affect, say, 1%, we'll be out of business if it's a safety related.
Yeah. Well, here's the other side of the issue. A company client of ours was going after ISO 27001. It's a
Hmm.
cybersecurity or what they
Oh,
call
okay. Yeah, I didn't
information
recognize the number.
security management system.
Yeah. Just as a complete aside, Greg, there are people in the world, and you immediately defined what that number was, but there's so many people I've run into, they go, "Oh, you need to use 5601." What the hell is 5601? Stuff like that. And you didn't do that, so thank you.
Well, it's, you know, years ago I was an engineer. Now I focus on decision making.
Which for me is related, very much related.
Absolutely, because that's really at the end of the day, the value we provide is the quality and accuracy and reliability of our decisions.
Yep.
But here's this company, global company, I don't know, 20, 30 billion. And they were basically, and just to give you some context, they're global. They got data centers all around the world, probably about seven. Company had come in charged them $500,000, $250,000 to basically do a risk analysis.
Hmm.
Problem is they were identifying every possible threat and risk.
Yeah.
So what happens is you got a risk register with 10,000 risks,
Yeah.
but they had
Right.
no
Now what do I
threshold.
do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, basically boiling the ocean. But the problem was they had no threshold for determining what was a critical threat or critical risk.
Hmm.
It's this thing in quality, the Pareto, separate the critical few from the insignificant many.
Right.
They had no threshold for decision making to what would be considered a major threat or a major risk. So what happens is they were reporting everything, and the result is you got 10,000 risks or threats.
Yeah, it's too long, don't read.
Exactly, exactly. So you have to have some threshold for decision making to consider. So that's one of the first things. And you can think of that as risk appetite. What are you considering to be a threshold in terms of mortality, morbidity, reliability? I know
Yeah.
we're not going to go MTBF, but
Yeah. But yeah,
you have to have
I
some
have a,
metric.
what I've also found it is like in doing FMEAs, is in setting the top two scales of a, not the occurrence, but the severity of, what's the consequence if this happens, is it's in the FMEA, part of the work is to set those scales so that the group that you're working with has a common understanding of it. And that's where the risk appetite difference of different people comes to play. And then it comes down to the discussion of, here's a scenario that I would say we can deal with, and it's not a safety thing. And we'll see how it shakes out against all the other priorities we have. And then somebody would say, no, I disagree. I have a smaller risk appetite, and that's too serious. We need to deal with it. And then we come to some kind of consensus, and then it's still a bit fuzzy, but we use scenarios or like you said, if it could start a fire, is it a fire that the system itself can contain, or is it a fire that will always propagate? It comes down to cases like that that we then try to parse. Well, is it a seven or is it an eight? And it's so dependent on the group you're talking to or the decision maker you're working with. Because as you know, I think you taught me this, is that some people will jump off the cliff and then put their parachute on. And others will, find the path around the backside and get on the bus and drive to the bottom of the hill instead. Um, we all have different risk appetites or risk tolerance and stuff like that. And so when you're trying to say what crosses that threshold, you got to stop and back up and say, what do we all agree is the threshold, which is difficult to start with. It's not usually the meeting goes long enough and the coffee's run out and people will go, all right, I agree. We'll use that and we'll move on.
Well, you're describing the dynamic in a team.
Hmm.
So what happens when you take those RPNs or whatever metric you're using, whether it can be,
Yep.
outside of the team and trying to explain it to a manager, senior manager, director, senior director, or VP?
Yeah.
It's it's like whispering in somebody's ear with a message, right? That person does it again and again and again.
Well, there's some of that. Yeah. I mean, the worst you can do is to say, here's our recommendations. We got to deal with these. And they don't have the context or the discussion. You know, if you think it's going to be controversial or subject to a different set of risk appetites by those different people, then it's here's who's here these people are. It's kind of build credibility. These why we had these people in this room with their experience and so on. And then here's the discussion that surrounded why we elevated this to this area. And sometimes it's we just need more information. We're going to run experiments to find out is it really a problem or not, which I find gets accepted way more often. It's hard to turn down. We believe it's a risk or has a potential, it's reasonable potential to be a high risk, a high consequence risk, and we want to find out if it's true or not. And other times it's no, we've got 15 phone calls in the last month that our product burned down a warehouse because it failed and failed hot. And they're like, no, you really need to take care of that. And you get pushback sometimes. It's amazing to me.
So the two biggest risks that I see in your conversation, three biggest risks, are one, the ability of engineers not to frame, scope, or to communicate the problem or
Yeah,
the
that's a
second
very common problem.
is a big problem. The second is what I would call risk acceptance or risk definition or taxonomy.
Hmm.
The techie folks, reliability folks, quality folks have one way of talking, framing the issue,
Hmm.
scoping the issue, coming up with solutions. But that language might not be synonymous or consonant with that of the manager or senior directors.
Well, you've talked about it often as like the VP level is it has to be material, and it has its
Material.
own definition, which engineers tend not to use.
They never use it. The other definition I would use that you used is what is reasonable?
Hmm.
Now, for us in my world, which is sort of the executive world, reasonableness, I mean, I can talk days for what it means, or what risk
Or
appetite means, or what
yeah,
material means.
yeah, they're
But
vague
those
enough
concepts are
definitions.
foreign to the engineer.
Yeah.
And unless there's consonance or what do you want to call it, alignment between what the executive wants and thinks and understands and the engineer, it's very difficult to escalate or to, you know, uh, get a
Communicate it
resolution.
clearly. Yeah, communicate it clearly. If we knew what
Yeah,
the rubric was and what the the types of scope of an issue. And I find some organizations it's really easy because let's say we find a couple of failures on an early shipment of a product or in manufacturing or whatever, and we do the failure analysis. We find that it's a problem with this one vendor and the product isn't what it's supposed to be, and it causes our system to fail or fail bad in a bad way. Usually the first question I get in a good organization is this affecting only, those two units, or is there evidence that it's in every unit that has those components in it? And then how many of those units have that vendor's component in it? And what's the probability if it has that component that it's going to fail? And those are all questions reliability engineers are pretty comfortable with. And we get a hold of procurement, we get a hold of manufacturing records and stuff like that as a way to scope it. And because I get the senior manager ones, if this only affects two units and we caught them, it's not an issue. We did what we're, it's not an issue now. But if you find it and it's a latent defect that's going to catastrophically fail, 50% of our products that are already on the boat going to the field, well, now that's 100 million, that's 100,000 to millions of dollars problem. And now I care.
now, from my side, I would scope it in terms, okay, you've got a product failure. The product is, you're looking at the product individually. Okay. And from my point of view, it's saying, let's say that it fails catastrophically. So we know the
Mm-hmm.
product is going to, crap out. But then I say, who provided the product? You say it's a supplier. Great. What's the AQL or what's the acceptable quality level?
Yeah.
Well, it's 1%. Okay. And then I'll ask the other question, where are the subcomponents coming from? And you'll say, well, these are three suppliers with AQLs of
Mm-hmm.
10,
Yeah.
1,
Different
and
numbers. Yeah.
30. Yeah, exactly. Those three sub-suppliers, second tier, are providing product that have much higher AQLs, acceptable quality levels, meaning you have much higher failure rates than what you're expecting. So, there's really, it becomes a process issue. It's not becomes a reliability product issue. It's actually a process issue of looking at the second, third tier suppliers to see what are they doing. The
Mm-hmm.
question is, do we have the time to
Which we
actually
usually don't until there's a disaster of
bingo?
some
That's
sort.
exactly right.
Yeah.
We don't
But
have.
when you're describing that line of questioning, it's like, are you just looking for a legal way to get off the hook and blame somebody else?
No, this this has been a challenge between the two of us. I look at things from the enterprise point of view, which is executive point of view.
Yeah. And I agree with looking at the process. And that's part of the longer term solution, the way I look at it. What are
Yes.
we going to do now? Are we going to do a recall or not?
Well,
kind
at
of
the
thing.
point when you when you ask the question, do we have a recall? We're beyond the pale. We're at the point of diminishing return.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
expense of a recall is going to be 1,000 times more than asking the right questions on the front end, right?
Right.
Does your
And if we
supplier have the
don't,
right suppliers to
right,
provide you with good product?
right. And if
Oh,
we don't, and that becomes discovered, it doesn't solve the problem with the 50,000 units on the truck heading to the customer. So I think my focus tends to be, let's solve the immediate problem, learn what we need to know. I agree, looking at the process is important. The long-term systemic solutions need to be there, and I appreciate that. Yet fixing our process today doesn't solve the problem that happened yesterday.
well, and that's one of the challenges that we talked about last week. When you look at problems that occurred, we're looking rear view, and we
Yeah.
need to look at the front view to be able to be proactive, preventive, and predictive.
Well, I agree with that. I totally agree. Yet when 2020 shows up, I'll show them where your office is.
That's right.
You know? So, and I've used that line with one manager that was just a stick in the mud and said, oh, and I don't recall the details if he was looking at the big picture and wanted to fix the future processes. No, you need to fix this now for the products that are in the warehouse and on the truck and on the boat because it's not going to work. It's going to be a problem. I think it was more of a reliability problem. And it was a material amount. Looking in hindsight, it was tens of millions of dollars for a relatively small company, like, and he just didn't want to deal with the immediate stuff. And like, all right, when 2020 shows up for 60 minutes, and then it was like, oh, that might make my career bad, like, and then he got it. It's like,
And what happens is, do you want to be the person who makes the call for 100% scrap or rework or return?
yeah, and it's also, yeah,
It's a
that's what you
career
signed
decision.
up for. That's what you signed up for, being the general manager here. Come on. Here's the evidence, here's the details, here's the engineering justification, here's the financial justification, here's all this stuff. And you have, recall, live with the consequences, all the risk, consequence options that we have, or do we mitigate it? We buy insurance, do whatever, but it's ignoring it is not an option. Well,
Well,
I guess it is for some
you can
people.
scrap it, recall it, or
Rework it,
rework it. Yeah.
yeah, and do all kinds of stuff. But it's the and it was something I learned in the Army from one of my commanders that I was working for, and he said the only thing you can do that will make me upset is not make a decision. He
And
said,
that's a decision.
well, no, he said, and I've run into managers that do this habitually. It's like, hey, boss, hey, Greg, I'd like to go to this conference. It's going to cost this much. It's this 3 days. This is what I expect, to pick up on. And here's the things I want to learn or do or whatever, network and stuff like that. And for me, it should be a yes or no question. Yes, we have the budget. Yes, that would be good for you. Or have you thought about other options or whatever? But it's usually dead silence.
And that's a decision.
It is a decision. Then it's not a denial because I just bought the tickets and went anyway. And he said, well, I didn't approve it. Well, you didn't disapprove it either, which I equate. And he didn't like that idea. And I said, if I ask you a question, should I turn left or right? I'm looking for advice. I'm looking for, the picture that you view it as. And he had a habit of didn't matter what the question was. He just kicked it down the road, ignored it, delayed it. And yes, it ends up being a decision in many cases. It ends up being mute, and then we pay the consequences for it or whatever happens. But it was infuriating that I didn't know what his risk appetite was or what the budget constraints were. I got no information at all. It was just ghosted. And so that's what I mean by it's worse than the decision to do nothing. It's worse in my mind. But anyway, I digress to one manager that I hope nobody else ever had to work under again. But
Well, here's my final thought on
uh,
that because this comes up, it's come up many times, and it's even come up lately. if I have somebody who's deferring to me, let's say I'm the manager,
Hmm.
and somebody defers to me all the time, I'm doing that person's work. Why do I need him or her?
Oh, yeah. But if you're the one that says, yes, you can spend that 10K or 50K or whatever and to go forward with a project, and that's your decision, not mine. And I'm not doing your work. I'm giving you the information and evidence to make a decision. And so but I agree with you. If you want to be micromanaged, then you're asking your boss to really do your work. I agree with that.
And you don't understand the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
You're not coming up with a plan, a justification, an ROI, or the benefit risk for approving your
Oh, I did. I
three-day
knew
thing.
that was just part of the culture in the organization. It was not a formal ROI, but it was pretty damn close to it, right? And it was a known practice. But anyway, that could be a whole nother episode, dealing with crap boss. But in my opinion, I'm sure he had a different point of view of his performance. But the idea, the
And
idea
chances
is,
are I'll play the boss, but that's okay.
yeah, we can do that. We can do that. But the idea is that, there's many, many factors, and risk appetite, I think, is one of the ways to think of it. And at different points of view at different parts of the organization, as to where's the threshold. And so my my final thought on this is that, part of it is reading the room and what's the culture in the organization, and talk to people you trust to get a sense of where the boundaries are, what kinds of triggers exist. And when in doubt, try it. Say, hey, I think this is a problem. And if it's just no, not really, then ask a follow-up question. Well, what is? Is it defined? Is there some guidance here or something like that? But start floating those, trial balloons and seeing which ones cross that threshold and which ones don't. Probably the problem is how much coffee somebody had sometimes, whether they, changed the boundary or had a fight with their spouse before coming to work or whatever. But it's in my experience, it's vague. And there's so many factors in it that I'm not privy to when I need, you know, hundred, a couple $100,000 to, start a project to mitigate it, because I'm not in charge of spending a couple $100,000. So I think it's complicated and it's a frustration point, but I think we can deal with it by being conscious of it, that it is vague. There isn't a set answer. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. My final thoughts are if you are vague, if you're uncertain, chances are you don't know what you're doing. In those circumstances, scope, frame the issue,
Hmm.
develop boundary conditions, write your assumptions down, and then have a logical process for solving the problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with uncertainty, and it's like having a blindfold, shooting a dart at an unknown target.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get that. No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. My experience suggests that the target moves sometimes.
Yes, it does.
Let's end on that happy note there.
Yeah, I know we have to leave on a very positive note. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't have to, but it's part of what we do.
All right.
But if you're listening to this, do you struggle with this, or do you have a pretty decent structure for it, and so on? And it's not dealing with a boss that can't make a decision, or in my opinion, but dealing with somebody, is, do I report this or not? Do I escalate this or not? Is there a clean way to do that, it, and or not? And I have to agree with Greg. Sometimes we don't know the process. We don't know this, how to deal with all the issues that frame the topic well. And it's inherent, or it's endemic, I think is the right word, our lack of ability to communicate clearly. So part of it is that too. It's on us. But the idea is that be aware of it. Be aware of it. That what you think is we got to fix this with all the investment we possibly can do, may not be justified to do. And so do your homework, get to know your organization, and move forward. But if you're dealing with this stuff, if you got some ideas that we didn't touch on, or hurdles that we didn't touch on, let us know. Go over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. You can find a couple ways to get in touch with us. Greg and I and the other hosts of the show are all available through LinkedIn or our About pages. And we really do enjoy getting questions and comments and stuff. And then we can get you some feedback and help you move forward. And what I typically do, and I know our other hosts do it too, is that, well, that might be a good topic for the show. We can expand on it and get some more points of views on it and so on. And so then the wider audience can benefit from it. So we look forward to your questions and comments. That's what I'm trying to say.
I'll second that.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
All right, Fred.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.